In this video, we'll unpack the concept of primary, secondary, and tertiary sources. We'll cover the pros and cons of each data source to help you choose the right approach for your research study or paper. By the way, if you're currently working on a dissertation, thesis, or research project, be sure to grab our free dissertation templates to help fast-track your write-up. These tried and tested templates provide a detailed roadmap to guide you through each chapter, section by section. If that sounds helpful, you can find the link in the description down below. So let's get started with the first of the trio, primary sources. Simply put, primary sources, also referred to as primary data, are the original, raw, unprocessed data or evidence collected in a study. Most commonly, primary sources include interview transcripts or quantitative survey data, but they can also include things like physical measurements, such as height, weight, blood pressure, or even heart rate, first-hand observations of a specific phenomenon or event, or sensor data from wearable devices or environmental sensors. Primary sources are often considered to be the purest sources because they provide direct, unfiltered data which has not been processed or interpreted in any way. Now that said, working with primary data naturally has both benefits and drawbacks. Some of the main advantages include purity. Primary sources provide first-hand accounts of events, ideas, and experiences, which means you get access to the rawest, cleanest form of data. Perspective. Primary sources allow you to gain a deeper understanding of the perspectives of the people who created them, providing insights into how different groups of people viewed an event or phenomenon. Richness. Primary data often provides a wealth of detail and nuances that can be missed by secondary data. We'll cover that shortly. This can provide you with a more complete and nuanced understanding of the topic. On the flip side, some of the main disadvantages include bias. Given their rawness, primary sources can often contain hard-to-spot biases that can skew or limit your understanding of the issue at hand. Inaccessibility. Sometimes collecting fresh primary data can be difficult, expensive, or even impossible. For example, collecting sensor data can require costly equipment and a large sample. Fragility. Physical artifacts such as manuscripts may be fragile and require special handling, which can make them difficult for you to access or study. As you can see, the strengths and weaknesses of primary sources are oftentimes two sides of the same coin. For example, primary data will allow you to gain insight into people's unique perspectives, but at the same time, it bakes in a significant level of each participant's personal bias. So it's important to carefully consider what the aim of your research is and whether this type of data source makes sense for you. Now that we've got a clearer picture of what primary sources are, let's take a look at secondary sources. Secondary sources are materials that provide an analysis or interpretation of primary sources, primary data. Most commonly, secondary sources of information include books, journal articles, and documentaries, but they can also include things like the biography of a pop icon, an industry report prepared by a research consultancy, or a blog post that reviews and compares the performance of competing products. Unlike primary sources, which are raw and uninterpreted, secondary sources provide a distilled interpreted view of the data. Naturally, these types of sources have their own set of pros and cons. Some of the main advantages include convenience. Secondary sources are often easier to access and use than primary sources, as they are widely available in libraries, journal databases, etc. Interpretation and syntheses. Secondary sources provide interpretation and syntheses of the topic of interest, which can help you quickly understand the most important takeaways from a data set. Time saving. Secondary sources can save you time, as you don't need to analyze primary sources yourself. You can just read the summaries or interpretations provided by experts in the field. Now, on the flip side, some of the main disadvantages to be aware of include distance from original sources. Secondary sources are based on primary data, but the information has been filtered through the lens of the author, which will naturally carry some level of bias and perhaps even a hidden agenda. Limited context. Secondary sources may not provide the same level of contextual information or detail as primary sources, which can limit your understanding of the situation and contribute toward a warped understanding. Inaccuracies. Since secondary sources are the product of human efforts, they may contain inaccuracies or errors, especially if the author has misinterpreted primary data. Similarly, they can rely on outdated information, making them less relevant. It's important to mention that primary and secondary data are not mutually exclusive. In other words, it doesn't need to be strictly one or the other. Secondary sources can be used to supplement primary data by providing additional information or context for a popular topic. For example, if you were researching Martin Luther King Jr., your primary source could be transcripts of the speeches that he gave during the civil rights movement. To supplement this information, you could then use secondary sources, such as biographies written about him, or maybe even newspaper articles from the time period in which he was active. Once again, it's important to think about what you're trying to achieve with your research. That is to say, what are your research aims? As with all methodological choices, your decision to make use of primary or secondary data, or both, needs to be informed by your overall research aims. If you'd like to learn more about research aims, we've got a video covering that up here. We'll also provide the link in the description. Last but not least, we've got tertiary sources. Simply put, tertiary sources are materials that provide a general overview of a topic. They often summarize or synthesize information from a combination of primary and secondary sources, such as books, articles, and other documents. Some examples of tertiary sources include textbooks and study guides, encyclopedias, Wikipedia, almanacs, and dictionaries. Tertiary sources can be useful when you're just starting to learn about a completely new topic, as they provide an overview of the subject matter without getting too in-depth into specific details. For example, if you're researching the history of World War II, but don't know much about it yet, reading an encyclopedia article or Wikipedia entry about the war would be helpful in providing you with some basic facts and background information. Tertiary sources are also useful in terms of providing a starting point for citations to secondary sources. In other words, you can use tertiary sources to identify seminal journal articles and academic resources. Similarly, tertiary resources may also contain lists of related topics or keywords, which you can use to find more information regarding your topic of interest. Importantly, while tertiary sources are a valuable starting point for your research, they're not ideal sources to cite in your study or paper. Instead, you should aim to cite high-quality, credible secondary sources, such as peer-reviewed journal articles and papers. So remember to only use tertiary sources as a starting point. Don't make the classic mistake of citing Wikipedia as your main source. In this video, we've explored the trinity of primary, secondary, and tertiary sources. Let's quickly recap. Primary sources include the original raw data or evidence that you collect yourself in a study. For example, interview transcripts or statistical data. Secondary sources include distilled analyses and interpretations of primary data that someone else collected for their study. For example, journal articles and critical analysis pieces. Tertiary sources include materials that provide a general overview of a topic. For example, encyclopedias, study guides, and handbooks. Each source type has its own set of strengths and weaknesses and can play a different role within a research project. Therefore, it's important to ensure that your choice of source, or sources, is guided by and aligned with your overall research aims. If you got value from this video, please hit that like button to help more students find this content. For more videos like this, check out the Grad Coach channel, and make sure you subscribe for plain language, actionable research tips and advice every week. Also, if you're looking for one-on-one support with your dissertation, thesis, or research project, be sure to check out our private coaching service, where we hold your hand throughout the research process, step by step. You can learn more about that and book a free initial consultation at gradcoach.com.